All right, everybody, welcome back. We are at John, well, we did 18 last week, we're up to John 19 in our Gospels in a year. And just a couple of quick recaps, I guess, is that I think it's really important that we do, as Christians, spend a lot of time in the Gospels and learning who Jesus is. Remember, Jesus obviously is the center of our faith, the center of our belief system, is the center of our life, and should be the center of how we read Scripture. We need to know who Jesus is so that we're interpreting Scripture the way He interprets Scripture. I think sometimes we have the temptation to interpret Jesus through our belief system of the rest of Scripture, and that's not a good thing. So it's really great just to get to know who He is and understand the Scriptures, understand life through His lens. And then we're up to the book of John, the very last couple of chapters, and remember the purpose of John, we'll get to it I think next week or the week after, I don't remember, but talks about that he wrote the book so that we would be convinced that he is the Messiah, and that was the whole purpose of John's book. So at the end of chapter 18, we have Jesus being confronted by Pilate, and Pilate sort of realizes that he's innocent. We're going to get to it because chapter 19 is actually all about the political intrigue. So the high priest was a sort of Caiaphas, it was a corrupt religious system. You know, there's the next layer down, they are absolutely into following Torah, they're absolutely on the level, but this level of corruption, this level of power is being used and abused, I guess, and Pilate sort of doesn't really get what's going on in a lot of ways, and so there's a lot of this political intrigue as we get into chapter 19. So let's get into it. All right, so chapter 19 is the lead up, and you know, the crucifixion and the lead up to it, and so you've got a lot of mockery happening. You know, Jesus being the king, and so Jesus being the Messiah. So you know, you got your royal robes, you've got your crown and of thorns, and all this sort of stuff that's happening. There's a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of cruelty that goes along with it. The crown of thorns probably wasn't quite. You know, we get these imagery of just forcing the crown of thorns into Jesus's skull, and there's probably a truth to it, but the reality is after the beatings and the whatever, his body would be in such a level of shock it probably wouldn't register anyway. To me, the cruel bit is the robe, because they put the robe on him after being beaten, and so obviously then it's going to, all the blood and whatever is going to stick to the robe, it's going to stick to his back. So when they're, you know, I don't even want to go into it, it just makes me shudder. The point being is there's a lot of mockery, there's a lot of torture, there's a lot of hurt. Jesus went through a lot in this particular space and place for us. And, you know, Pilate, as I said, wasn't really getting what was going on, because as far as Pilate's concerned, he's going like, I mean, not that, you know, this is in the scripture, but essentially what would be going on in his mind is that you guys can kill him, you can stone him, why are you trying to bother us with this? And his only concern is that Jerusalem stays peaceful. That's his mandate. All that Rome, there's this thing called a Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which is just it's just not real. It's peace driven by oppression and torture and death and murder and whatever. But that was his idea. So as long as Jerusalem is peaceful, Pilate's going to be fine. And that's where this political intrigue starts to come in. You know, there's lines like, if you don't do this, you're no friend of Caesar. There's this idea, this underlying dialogue that the chief priests are going to cause all sorts of dramas for Pilate if he doesn't do what they're telling him to do. And sort of his response to that was to be a bit kind of snarky back, in the sense of, you know, there's the signs of King of the Jews in 3 different languages, and they're like, you can't do that. And it's like, I've written what I've written. It's like, you're going to twist my arm up my back kind of idea. Well, I'm going to do it back to you. And there's this whole sort of political intrigue that's starting to happen. And Jesus is, in a lot of ways, is just caught in the middle of this. So Pilate then kind of gives up, I guess, and says, all right, fine, I wash my hands of this. And they start shouting, take him away. Take him away. It's a really fascinating thing for them to yell out, actually, because in the Hebrew, which they would have been speaking, take him away is Azazel, which is actually, if you go back to Yom Kippur, or if you go back to the Day of Atonement, Azazel is the scapegoat. They're literally yelling out for Jesus to be the scapegoat. Take him away, Azazel. And you'll find if you study into Yom Kippur on the Day of Atonement, there is a lot of what Jesus is going through that is a remez back to the Day of Atonement. So even the fact that they're yelling Azazel, there would have been people going, wow, this is really interesting. This is just like the Day of Atonement. The other remez that we've talked a little bit about, which is just massive around Jesus, is Psalm 22. So we'll find at the end of chapter 19 that the guards want to gamble for Jesus's clothes. I'm just going to grab my Bible here. They're going to gamble for Jesus's clothes. And this is an interesting one because, again, if we go to Psalm 22, it's very much a throwback. Verse 18, they are dividing up my clothes among themselves. They are rolling dice for my garments. And then we also know it says, Father, why have you forsaken me? Which is verse 1, my God, why have you abandoned me? And then when you go to the end, it's about verse 24. It says, for he did not despise or detest the suffering of the oppressed. He did not ignore him when he cried out to him. He responded. And what I really found fascinating when I was looking into this is that, generally speaking, a rabbi, I'm not sure if it's a Jewish person or a rabbi, to be honest, I'm not sure, but definitely with rabbis, they would have a life psalm. You wouldn't tell anybody about it. It would just be a psalm that was between sort of you and God and whatever. And when you died, you either wanted to die speaking the Shema, which is the Lord our God is one, and that chunk of scripture, or your life psalm. And so it's very intentional, I think, that there's a lot of throwbacks to chapter 22. Jesus, nearly everything he's saying is just back to 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? And it's just, I think there's this beautiful idea that perhaps this is Jesus's life psalm, and that as he's dying, he is reciting and speaking into that. And I think that's very, very cool. So just to finish this one up, I actually just thought it might be a good moment to actually just talk about the Easter timeline. So it's really interesting. At face value, it can be hard to see how it all sort of works out. But one train of thought is this. So most of us would be aware that the Jewish Sabbath is on the Friday night through the Saturday, because a day starts at night. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and there was day, there was night, there was day. That was the first day. So the Sabbath starts on the evening of the Friday, and that's where they would have their Passover. But it also says that doesn't kind of fit the timeline. One way that we could look at the timeline is that it was Passover, and Passover is a special holiday, and it has its own Sabbath, right? So in this particular case, Passover Sabbath was on, I think, the Thursday, and so Jesus then is able to partake of his Sabbath, his Passover meal, and then on the Friday he becomes the Passover lamb. And then 3 days, so you go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and even though it might have been the Friday evening, it doesn't really matter to the Jewish perspective, a part of a day. So you could sort of say 2 or 3 hours, let's just say 10 o'clock at night from our perspective, 10 o'clock at night on the Friday, all day Saturday to 3 in the morning on Sunday, that would still be regarded as 3 days because they're partial, even though they're partial days, as a narrative it'd be written as 3 days. So you've got the Passover Sabbath, the Passover Sabbath where Jesus celebrates Passover. Then you have the actual Passover where Jesus becomes the Passover lamb. And then the first day following the Passover Sabbath, which would be the Sunday when he rose, is actually the day of first fruits. So Jesus resurrected as the first fruit of all creation. So I think that's very cool, even how that fits in and aligns with all of the Gospels together. And so, I don't know, I think there's a few things that we can take away from that. Number one is the intentionality of Scripture and the intentionality of Jesus. That Jesus, it wasn't this. Jesus was, this idea of reciting. Well, do you have verses, life verses that when life is tough you can go to and get through? Do you have life verses that are going to encourage you and lift you up when you go through these sort of situations? Even then, the intentionality of Passover, and then the Passover Sabbath, and then the Sabbath and the first fruits. I think the intentionality of Scripture is really incredible as well. We need to be living our lives with intention, and I think that's a godly thing. And then the third thing, if we go back to the start, I think we've got to make sure that we're always trying to avoid political solutions. The solutions are never meant to be political. They're always meant to be kingdom. Jesus came to inaugurate a new kingdom, and that is where the solutions come from. And so, I don't know, there's my thoughts over chapter 19. Have a bit of a read through, make some comments, have a look at what jumped out at you. I'm sure I've missed some stuff, so make sure you add that in. And awesome. We'll see you next week.